Dark forest. Why does the dark forest evoke such powerful emotions? When we hear of or set stories in dark forests or dream about them, what might that do to the brain and the mind? In therapy, sometimes we dream of dark forests, and it often evokes fear and vulnerability, especially if we're walking along the forest floor at night when there are creatures out there. We have a strong desire to climb up a tree, maybe, and escape, which naturally doesn't always work. Children will balk at going into a dark forest. And even as adults, it's quite an experience to wander out in the woods at night. Maybe try it sometime and you'll get a sense of what I mean. Now, naturally, in order to explain this emotion, some people will trot out the usual everything is learned explanations, like, well, we hear stories about dark forests and we see people scared, so we learn to be scared of it. No. Any explanation that leaves out biological and ancestral or inherited predispositions is going to be weak and incomplete, and in my case, really annoying. So, I wanted to dive deep today into this imagery just to give you a feel for just how primordial this and archetypal this really is. Consider first that the dark forest is actually composed of two primary metaphors, if you're looking at this from a storytelling or dreaming perspective. The first one is the idea that danger, the unknown, or the unmanifest is dark. And that has to do with our diurnal, very high light oriented type of vision that exists in humans. Then the other one is that the unknown or the non human or the dangerous is in itself a forest. And this one's a little bit more complex too, as we'll get into. But in order to really understand why these primary metaphors are innate, and we will learn and teach ourselves these just as it so happens because we're Homo sapiens and we all have the same physiology. We have to look deeper into the hominin lineage. So the dark forest is a double whammy, really, when it comes to innate universal symbols. And all of us share this tendency to make this symbolic imagery due to our own biological inheritance. Consider, for example, that Ardipithecus ramidus, which is an early hominin that dwelt about 6 million years ago in heavy forested African habitats, they lived in forests. They had upright posture. They likely had music and primitive language. But they were also very small, and often they were prey. As a result, or as a defense against that, they were very cooperative. And it looks, some of the newer research coming out on this suggests that moving together and being musical and even dance may have originated from defensive behavior in order to discourage predators from attacking. If one single small primate wandering around in the forest or in the plains or whatever is easy pickings, but 20 of them all screaming and making an unholy racket, a lot of predators are going to balk at attacking that. And this, in fact, chimps do this. So we know that this is part of the lineage. Now, chimps, of course, are modern animals, and there is a break-off point between humans and chimpanzees. So that doesn't give us as much information as if we could observe these proto-humans live, but it's part of the puzzle. In any case, the point is that forests are habitats that humans and proto-human ancestors have been living in for literally millions of years. That is a really long time for predispositions related to our survival to make it onto the genome, and I'm very, very certain at this point that there are a lot of them that have yet to be identified. But I think it would be absurd to say that there are not any. Now, I think this is really important because these inklings and intuitions still survive to this day in all humans because of our history. The dark forest, then, is a primordial proto-human habitat that likely elicited innate genetic responses. And so they were prime material for spontaneous imagery to depict our current feelings, which is what happens in dreams. It's as if I'm wandering in the dark forest is a great way to encapsulate a host of emotions using this primordial primitive imagery that's already kind of hardwired into the genome. Folktales like Hansel and Gretel, which I analyzed in another video in more depth, use this imagery brilliantly to evoke the feeling and depict the universal situation at hand, in that case being abandoned. Patients in therapy who are dealing with repressed feelings, dark urges, unwanted moods, are navigating dangerous territory as if they were walking in a dark forest alone in the deep black night. So that's why you might see this dream emerge in someone who is going through psychotherapy. The genetic and ancestral memory that has made it into our genome in the form of the hundreds of informational codes that we inherit, however, is not actually super simple. There's a lot of nuance to this, actually. It's sophisticated. The forest has a complex of intense feelings surrounding it. A forest of light, for example, is idyllic. It's full of nature spirits that are sometimes benevolent, sometimes malevolent. What they are never is irrelevant. We are strongly attuned to the abundant life in the forests. But then when it's a dark forest, that leans heavily into the dangerous, the evil, and the scary side, because we are not nocturnal creatures. But many of our ancestral predators were nocturnal creatures. Not only do you have snakes and spiders, wolves, bears, leopards, but there was also a whole host of predators that are now extinct, but I believe our genome still remembers them. If you take, for example, when you ask children what they are most afraid of, they will not tell you that it's things that actually have much chance of harming them. Like, for example, children in urban Chicago, for example, you ask them what they're most afraid of, what do they tell you? Monsters, lions, tigers, stuff like that. The likelihood of them getting attacked by a tiger in downtown Chicago is pretty minimal. And yet that's what children are afraid of. Not things that actually will kill them, like cigarettes or cars or electric sockets. So this carries over into adulthood. And of course, when we're conjuring up images in dreams, we'll use this very primitive stuff because it's so emotionally powerful. The genome is a big part of this. All of that time frame that we've dealt with these predators and the other potential dangers of a dark forest are primed on the genome, I think, to produce not only quick acting, but also medium and long-term epigenetic responses that we know exist on the genome that will have measurable effects on the brain and the body at varying levels of speed. Some of them react quickly and cause very fast changes, and some of them have changes that take a little longer to kick in, but they last longer too. I think really, though, the most terrifying part of the dark forest is that often in dreams or stories, it is an environment that we're facing alone, or the character of the dream is. One of our most primitive defenses, as it turns out, is each other. And if you look at the hominin lineage, you find that as the climate shifted for those early hominins, like the Australopithecines, predation actually increased due to a number of different factors. And more recent research is suggesting that this caused our proto-human ancestors to go from a more fractious type of primate species that had a lot of internal conflict into one where there was a lot more group cohesion, much greater emphasis on coordinated movement and voice, which probably led to the development of language, a shift into long-term mating strategies. This is where many of the ways in which we're different from chimpanzees, for example, and even bonobos on certain levels. This shifted to specializations to group living. In other words, in order for love, as we know, to evolve, there needed to be monsters in the darkness. Think about that. See you next time.